The devil has the best lines, but Guy Rundle's hot on his heels. This is a very long room with very long acoustics. There's a microphone down here, and we're going to have to ask you please to come down to this side of the room to ask questions so that everybody else in the room can hear.
I've written it down so I don't have a senior moment. But just deviating from what you were talking about, I just want to get an opinion about Assange and the rape charge in Sweden. And if he does go to Sweden to answer it, will the USA come in and grab him, and will he be hung, drawn and quartered when he gets to the USA? Or is it because there's a change of government there from Bush to Obama, will they go a bit easy on him? What's the current thinking on that?
The Assange's Swedish troubles are my speciality, because I spent 6 months in Sweden hanging around with the same type of women who are giving him a lot of trouble at the moment. The current state of play is that he's been put up for extradition. He's appealing that in the Court of Appeal in July. If there's a point of law, he will probably lose that appeal. If there's a point of law, it would then go to the Supreme Court in the UK as it is now. So that would delay it another few months. If not, he goes to Sweden, where Sweden has no bail system. You're either released on your own recognizance or you're in custody. So he'll be in custody for some period. I don't know what would happen. The odds are that he would be acquitted of those charges, sheerly on the conviction rate in Sweden on those sorts of charges. If indeed he's charged, he hasn't been charged yet. He's still just merely accused. Whether he's at more risk in Sweden or the UK concerning extradition to the US is another question. The UK and the US have an ultra-fast sort of extradition process, fast track one. Sweden and the US have an extradition process too. I don't actually think in this respect that there's much conspiracy going on here. I think it's just more a whole series of autonomous legal processes, cultural conflicts and the age-old problems of hyperactive men of a certain type. So the question is one just doesn't know. There's a grand jury impanelled at the moment in Maryland looking at whether Assange can, as Rob said, Assange can be charged under the Espionage Act and whether that can be created in some way. Once again, nobody knows whether that can be done. It's always seemed unlikely, given the current purview of the Espionage Act, but you never know. And then you have the question of whether Sweden is, as it usually seems to be, a fairly proper and open place where people obey the honest legal processes, or whether it really is, as Stieg Larsson paints it in his novels, some sort of crazy set of interconnecting conspiracies. So I can't tell you anything more useful than that. I don't think, and I think that's probably the cutting-edge state of play. I'm definitely against, if I can say anything useful, I'm definitely against the more conspiratorial idea that this is all some plan to get him back to America. I think it has nothing to do with that. I think it's just a series of interconnecting legal, personal and political fuck-ups.
Ron Jacobs.
I want to thank everybody for a fascinating set of presentations. And I want to believe, particularly the first and the last speaker, that WikiLeaks does matter. And I guess I have one slight concern that I wanted to ask you about. And I mean, if we think about leaks, we can imagine the leak as a whistleblower, which has been referenced a lot in the talks. But of course, there are also people who leak as a form of strategic communication, and I'm thinking of, the Richard Nixon sort of political operative kind of thing, whereby people leak from the inside in order to damage others. And it strikes me that this other type of leaking is so powerful and so pervasive that there's a bit of let's say a challenge of authenticity on the part of people who leak, and so there's always the possibility that they can be exposed as not sort of just seeking the truth. At the same time, also, of course, that there are these political operatives who are very skilled at this kind of politics of personal destruction, and so I guess. And we can imagine a situation, let's say, where something like WikiLeaks goes along just fine until one of two things happens. Either they leak information which is interpreted as reinforcing American interests, right, in which case they're seen as sort of propagandists and they become delegitimated from the left. Or, on the other hand, they, which I think is closer to what has happened in this instance, they leak information which is damaging to the United States, which unleashes this whole second kind of strategic political communication. They become perceived as anti-American, and then all of these political consultants in the U.S. start engaging in this kind of campaign against these actors. And so I guess the question is whether you see any kind of inherent vulnerability or instability in the WikiLeaks model.
No, I mean, I think that question goes to the heart of a problem I see with WikiLeaks, and also sort of in a way to what I was trying to say. It seems to me what Julian Assange, I think, has decided is that once the provenance of leaks is clear, that is to say, once it's clear they're not forgeries. I'll just tell an amusing story that one of the people that he got to register his organisation in the United States was someone that Guy has cryptically mentioned, not by name, the founder of Cryptome, a fellow called John Young. And John Young came to the view that WikiLeaks was going to be the fount of endless CIA disinformation and cut all links with it within a few weeks. Julian Assange's view, as I see it, is that once it's pretty certain that the leaks are authentic, not forgeries, they should be published no matter what. Now, what I was trying to say in my talk is that I think in the end that is an impossible position to take. There is no reason why one couldn't come to the view that authentic leaks are also very damaging from one point of view or another. I think it was wrong, and I think Assange now thinks it's wrong, that the Afghan war logs, which contained the names of various people who'd given information about the Taliban and so on to NATO, that their names were mentioned, because I don't think anyone thinks that Julian Assange or anyone else should become the judge and jury, making it possible people will be killed. And I tried to say also that I think a very big mistake was releasing the cables produced by the ClimateGate people, who are right-wing denialists. In other words, what I was trying to say is, and I think this is answering Ron's point, that leaks of all sorts of kind will come to WikiLeaks, and I can't see how in the end judgments can be avoided as to what should be published and what shouldn't. For that reason, and I also think it's completely right that leaks are used by politicians all the time to do harm to each other, and that there's kinds of information which is strategically released for political reasons, and that kind of stuff, I suppose, in the end might come to WikiLeaks as well. The only way round that, I think, I can only see two ways round the process. One is that judgment has to be used by people in WikiLeaks or other sites as to what is in the human interest to release and what is wrong. I just don't think we can operate with the idea that any information in the public realm deserves to be, every kind of information deserves to be made public. But more importantly, I think there should be diversity of WikiLeaks. That is, there should be, I was trying to say briefly at the end, there should be a variety of places that use encrypted, cryptography and remailers to allow people to leak. But people should leak to that site which they feel will be receptive to what they have to say. In other words, I would hope Greenpeace would set up such a site, as I was trying to say, but there's no reason why neoliberals shouldn't set up a site to show the malfeasance of over-centralised economic states and pour doubt on Hugo Chavez or whatever. In other words, I think that we need more information in the public realm, but it needs somehow to be sifted by human intelligence, and that anything that can be seen to be damaging ought to be rejected by any of the sites. In other words, I think Julian Assange is a fascinating person, but I think there are many things that he didn't really think through and is being forced to think through as the history of WikiLeaks continues.
Is at present a very... Oh, good.
I guess the other thing that is important, right, is that leaking either of the internal variety or of the external variety presumes some shared moral order in which the leak matters. And I think that's something that the WikiLeaks project has revealed very clearly, which is there's an unevenness of that moral presumption in several of the leak contexts. So sometimes they leak and everyone's like, I don't really care that much. And other times there's a leak and it's an enormous matter. And so that judgment happens inside of institutional spaces in which the moral premises are somewhat well understood. And this goes to your point, of course, that Assange finds that it's the Western, more open contexts that are in some ways more open to the leaking strategy itself. And so to the degree that WikiLeaks really is this new, novel, interesting, transnational possibility, and I think that it is, then it asks us, I think, a little bit to think, what are the conditions for the moral context in which the leaks are going to matter? Are they just simply going to be these interlocking, judicial and press systems that happily make their way along, or is it going to be the 5 editors of these newspapers, or is it going to be some other agency? And I think those kinds of questions about accountability and political decision-making haven't yet been sharply formulated.
So,
a question about the stranger aspects of all of this. I read an article, and the only reason it's from The Guardian, which is the only reason I bring it up here, is that one of the reasons that Assange is being sort of kept at bay is because he had, and this is the weird part, cables between the American military and UFOs. If you say, I don't know anything, I understand, but it seems such a bizarre and strange thing for anyone to say about it like that. If you have heard anything at all, no? Fair enough. Thank you.
When the early Cablegate stuff was being released, Assange did an interview in which he did mention, but he mentioned it merely as a fact of curiosity, that there are a couple of cables dealing with the inevitable inquiries that the US military has to deal with about Roswell, Area 51 in New Mexico, and that sort of thing. This was then constructed by some of Assange's detractors, especially in Britain, as Assange talking about UFOs. By my reading of it, he was never. He's not from the Twilight Zone. Just simply showed, what happens when you remark on things, not thinking about the weight of your words. So that was that. I think in general, just on what the last speaker was saying too. I keep forgetting to say that yes, in terms of judgment and those sorts of things, it seems to me obvious that you can't have the sort of anarchist sort of formulation of near total transparency that, in the last analysis, politics is always a contingent question. And I always think of the example of, if WikiLeaks had a whole lot of documents about the government of Bolivia, which I think is a pretty good government doing its best for the people of Bolivia, and which is fighting a hard-fought battle against mining owners who want to sort of split the country in two and create a civil war, then what is the morality of releasing that, even if some of the documents did point to corruption and so forth within the government of Bolivia? It seems to me that my obvious moral point there is no, you wouldn't release those, you would hold them back, and that there always is a surrounding morality within which the process of WikiLeaks or something like that is undertaken. And from my perspective, it's a sort of internationalist left one in that way, but others may have other ones. One forgets that some people, especially around the sort of computer world, do take that uber transparency thing totally seriously. That yes, inevitably there's always a question of judgment that has to be made. The main question, though, in relation both to old media and to the current state of political affairs is, do we suffer more from excessive openness or do we suffer more from excessive secrecy? In the question of forgeries, fabrications and that sort of thing leaked through WikiLeaks, well, we've seen a whole history in the 20th century and the 19th century, from the Zimmerman telegram, I think it was, which got the US into World War I, the Zinoviev telegram, which was used to defeat the Labour government in Britain, the Gulf of Tonkin incident in the 60s, for so forth and so on. We've seen many cases where a strategically placed fabrication can actually tip a country into war or worse. In that situation, that is the press using the limited model of release, the sort of smoking gun model, to actually have an effect, consciously corrupt or not. In that sort of situation, it seems to me that we have a better chance with something like WikiLeaks or multiple sort of sites like that of instantly exposing a forgery rather than allowing it to linger on and to have its effect. So in that respect, I think we're better off with more open processes like that than we were with the old age of the press and, trusting William Randolph Hearst or Rupert Murdoch to decide what we could and couldn't hear.
There's no one here, but Rob has some questions.
I just want to ask a couple of things of Eleanor and Peter, but just on, if I can just say on Guy's thing, just if there was this Bolivian stuff which was leaked, that's why I say, and it can go to the Wall Street Journal. It seems to me that it would be wrong to think, even if from one's own political perspective it was damaging, it seems to me wrong to think that true documents which don't have obvious human disastrous consequences should not see the light of day. But if there is a multiplicity of sites, then people can make judgments. I mean, I know what I'll think about the likelihood of taking seriously something that Rupert Murdoch is leaking and so on. So in other words, in the end, judgment is important, but also intelligence. People have to, in the end, make judgments about even documents, even authentic documents. If ClimateGate came out from the Wall Street Journal, I would have not been surprised, and I would have, thought other people could make the same judgments as me. But can I ask just a couple of questions to finish up on what Eleanor and Peter said, because I'd like to draw them in a bit. Eleanor, I was really interested in a comment, and I hadn't thought about it before, as to why you think it seems to me really interesting that newspapers were the place that Assange did select, rather than internet, when he wanted to get maximum impact for the leaks. And Peter, if I can say, I just sort of wonder whether you think exemplary behaviour is unimportant, and I do remind myself that you once held the Nelson Mandela chair. So,
So on the newspapers, and I mean, clearly these are not the only outlets that have been connected with WikiLeaks. The Swedish television interview is, really famous for the legislation then that, came from the suggestion of Assange, that, the Icelandic television, that the Iceland could become a, haven for freedom of the press, and, that legislation moved very quickly through the new parliament. But I think that the sort of venerable, crusty, old grey ladies, right, of these major European, American powers, the New York Times, Guardian, Der Spiegel, Le Monde and El País. I mean, these are very dominant in their respective national journalistic fields and bring a great deal of prestige and authority to anything that they're connected with. So quite apart from the unprecedented international collaboration, and there's probably been bits and pieces in the past, but this was a very dedicated long-term research process with the Bradley Manning case. In their respective journalistic fields, compared to all of the new, breathtakingly partisan, bitter, narrow competitors that we're increasingly seeing in many other parts of the media space, these sort of institutions, many of them papers of national record, really represent what it is that defines good journalism or good opinion or good analysis. There's a weightiness to it. And so to the degree that, people have choices, these are going to be outlets that they choose. They are also important peak national outlets, that is, specialist publications in all other parts of the media field or, the public sphere more generally tend to feed into these more general spaces in really important ways. So they have special access to national elites, policymakers and decision makers. So put that together with that collaboration, and I think it's a really quite an important institutional moment.
I'm a bit worried because when we came and we were mic'd for at the back here of these kind of mics, I was just wondering where these mics were going. Let me sort of pick up on a few points, then come to Robert's. The thing that worries me about multiple forms of leaking, which I've heard, the advantages of here, but none of the disadvantages of. I mean, in a time when we know there's a value and a commodification for everything, I guess the day is not too far away when there actually becomes a market for leaks. And if there's a market for leaks, can a tax for leaks be far behind, given the carbon tax conversation in this country? I mean, I think the other thing that's not been in this conversation so far, which is really important, is the question of leaks in the field of economics. Now, there has been some of this stuff, but I think the dominant power of neoliberal economics, its pervasive way that it's invaded our lives, I would be much more equally happy, equally comfortable if many more issues were leaked about, for example, the thoughts around BP as they were planning what happened in the Gulf of Mexico. That's linked, of course, to the climate change issue. But so I would like to see, and I don't know where this happens, maybe you can have a wiki economic leaks or something like that, because I think that's where we should look to this. And this really links up with Robert's question. Of course, exemplary behavior is important and necessary, and heroes are necessary in the political process. But I don't think we, of the broad left, can hope that these individual actions alone will change the nature of our world. What we need is a much more fundamental way of knitting together our energies, our ideas, and our inspiration. And it does seem to me that's the really hard work that we've got to do. That's the hard work which was done in the 19th century, which enabled the left to give vent to its anger and energy. So yes, exemplary behavior is important, but Mandela just didn't rise out of prison. He was carried to that position and through that whole process by everything that had gone before, that extensive knitting, the shoulders of other people he stood on, And frankly, I don't see in this conversation about WikiLeaks any of that fundamental knitting which is needed for the left either to attack the state, the American state, or the neoliberal system. And I think that's where the hard philosophical work needs to be done. That's where the discovery of a language of what this all means for people is really important.
We have one last question from the floor. Thank you.
I've been thinking about WikiLeaks from the perspective of business ethics and trying to think about what the impact might be on companies. So I've been doing a little bit of writing on this topic. Business ethics might be a contradiction in terms, but I'm interested in it all the same. I'm interested in anyone who wants to comment on the following question. It seems to me that there is potentially a first-order effect on companies in the sense that if a company has corrupt activity, WikiLeaks or its successors might, hopefully reveal this corruption. So that in itself is important. But there's a second-order effect, I think, that I've been thinking about, and that is that if companies realize that there are such things as WikiLeaks or other economic ones that might come up in its wake, that it's the fact that the existence of it may help to prevent corruption from happening in the first place. Now, this might be quite a naive idea, but I'm just interested to see if you think that it's naive in some of the ways that I think Julian Assange was naive. So is there such thing as the second-order effect? Does it have any weight? And might it make a difference?
I think, this relates to something Peter said, I think, about economic leaks and BP. This is once again the effect that one forgets some of the things WikiLeaks has done. The Trafigura scandal a few years ago was a WikiLeaks leak. This was about toxic dumping in Africa, and basically the use of Africa as a dump, as a toxic dump, relying on uneven economics of the world, whereby it was actually, in the interests, so-called, of a poor country to take on lethal toxic dumping effects. So I think there has been, where it's been possible, the leaking of economic stuff and the showing up that neoliberalism is in many ways a racket rather than a legitimate economic process. As regards the corruption effect, I don't think Assange has been naive in this second order effect. I think he would sort of agree with you that one of the things about making it possible for people to expose corruption safely is that there will always be someone in an organisation at any given point who's ready to crack, i.e. that their conscience as an honest person can no longer stand their the role they've been put in. And that one of the roles of having a safe place for leaking is to encourage the best part of that human being rather than the worst part, their desire to be an honest and truthful person rather than their fear or their sense that they'll be persecuted and isolated. And that in turn, you would hope, would have an effect that people would actually think more about their conduct in everyday life and whether they were being corrupt as a matter of course or whether they were being honest. So you would hope that would actually have an encouraging effect on that sort of thing. And just to put that into Peter's thing, I don't think it's about... I think it can be sort of useful to criticise the idea of that individuals can be too focused on and that sort of thing. But it does get a bit disheartening if you take something that has actually happened and had a massive effect and had a punch-on effect, which has involved a small number of people taking very substantial risks, and then say it really should have been something else. It really should have been a more collective process or that sort of thing. I don't think we need to look for heroes in terms of people to idolise, but I think we do need to, when people have actually grasped history by the neck a bit and actually decided they're going to transform it, theorised a way to transform it, and then acted in an exemplary way to encourage other people to act on that. Simply as a political point, I do think we need to recognise that that process occurs, that there are individuals who do that and grab that, and we have to not let our focus on collectivity or process or even a form of envy sort of overcome that. I think we do need to recognise when that has occurred and act on it. So, yeah, that's me.
Just very briefly, I mean, the point you raise, I think, is what Assange believes. I mean, it's what I take him to, what I call Darwinism, the survival of the best. He thinks if a company has corrupt behaviour, it has something to fear, and it will be therefore disabled as a result of fearing leaks. If it has nothing that it's ashamed of, it won't fear the leaks, and thus it will thrive. That's, in a way, his theory. If you're a Marxist, you'd believe that's naive, but if he's not, and nor am I, and believes that some companies can behave better than others. And so I think what you're saying is absolutely what he's trying to get at.
Let me first say to Guy, I mean, it's not one or the other. It's we advance in different ways, but I think that what I would like to see is that, and you're an example, and so is Robert in your presentations here, that people start theorizing about the process that's going on. I think that's the important work that needs to be done. And certainly we should celebrate these breakthroughs when they occur. On your second order thing, I mean, I'm afraid very skeptical about business. I started my life as a financial journalist, and remember the quick little phone calls between the journalists who are writing up companies and the stockbrokers. This is what I'm going to say, this is what's going to happen, blah, 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 blah. So I think, this sort of stuff goes on, and this trial in New York of this extraordinary man from Sri Lanka who's made all the money. These were not sort of the sort of best nature of people. These were little tidbits that were leaked down the line. And I think it seems to me that in the nature of particularly the financial world, a world which is structured around finance, this is the central project. And the central project is that people who are involved in this don't think that they're doing anything wrong. The people who are getting these huge salary increases in the aftermath of nearly bringing the world economic system to an end don't see anything wrong in this. I don't think they share a universe that the rest of us are in. They don't see that getting more money, actually, there's nothing wrong with this. There is no sort of moral universe that's operating there. So I'm very skeptical of this, the possibility of this.
It's time for me to close, and I'd like to close with thanks. I want to thank you all for coming very much. I want to thank the good folks of the Wheeler Centre for their patience with us. So thanks to you, thanks to the Wheeler Centre, thanks especially, and I ask you to join me in thanking them to our speakers. Thank you.